done. Okay. Thank you, Zoom. All right. So I think I'll start with more or less formal introductions, so, and, so and then we'll go and do more informal stuff, So, well, for those who haven't met me before, so my name is Yana Meerzon. I teach for University of Ottawa, and I am now the president of CATR. So University of Ottawa is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. So the participants and the guests, around this Zoom today are welcome, to post their greetings, their acknowledgement of the land, in the chat room if you decide so. So we will be speaking in English mostly. Do we have participants or audience, so who requires a translation into French? So maybe people can raise their hand, so because I did invite Sylvain Levoyer, who is in Montreal, but also teaching for UOttawa, and he's a board member for CATR. He's very generously gave us time, and energy, to translate. So if anybody requires translation, so please raise your hand, let us know. I also made Sylvain a note taker, right, Sylvain? Something like this, right? So do we have anybody?
Maybe one of the way we could proceed also is like if anyone doesn't understand something that was said or that's something that happened, they could also actually just direct message me. So I would be, well, I should be speaking French then. That's what I'm saying. S'il y a des gens donc parmi le groupe qui ne comprennent pas certaines choses qui ont été dites ou qui veulent que je répète, je serais heureux justement. Vous avez seulement à m'écrire en privé et puis je pourrais répéter, traduire et rendre tout ça plus accessible pour toutes et tous. Merci. Et en plus aussi, comme Yana disait, je pourrais aider aussi avec l'envoi de messages et aussi la capture justement de nos discussions. Merci.
Okay, merci beaucoup, Sylvain. So, okay. So because, so I arrived to the CATR as a CATR president in a very interesting time, as you understand, right in the middle of pandemic, so, and my first reaction was, how do we survive the whole thing, right? As a group, as a country, as people who are going to be teaching and so on. And I think that, well, depending on what's going to happen, but I have a feeling that this whole idea of online teaching is not going to go away from us very soon, so, and it feels like we are in quite a huge, like a learning curve, so the idea was that we would connect as much as we can across the country, so during this difficult time, talk to each other on different occasions, with different topics. So this is our very first roundtable. It's supposed to be very informal, so, and I'm extremely grateful, for people who said yes, to share their expertise. It doesn't mean that those who are here don't have the expertise, so I'm sure you do, so, or you might not have it, but anyway, it's a very open space to ask questions and to share concerns and worries, and that's why we're here. So I'm thinking of creating a second roundtable more dedicated to teaching practice online, so I'm thinking of October 1st as a possible date for that, so, but stay tuned, so you will hear about it. So our 4 distinguished guests today are Julia Henderson, so Julia, you want to maybe raise your hand, so for a second, hi. So Julia is teaching today at the Concordia University. You had the wonderful bios. I'm not going to go all over them, just a bit of a location kind of moment. I will ask Julia to speak first. Then, we have Kathryn, who is at BrockU University and also a theater critic and with Toronto Store. I will ask Kathryn to go second. Then, I will ask my colleague and friend Kathryn to talk about her own experiences, and very specifically, like in Australia, I guess, we also want to know how people on the other side of the world do what we're trying to do here. And finally, I will ask Larry from University of Toronto to also speak about, his own experiences. I know that it's very, very fresh. You just finished teaching the course, right, Larry? So yeah. So that's it. So when I asked the participants to give their presentation, so I basically said, I will be asking very simple things, So could you please very briefly talk about what kind of course you taught, or courses you taught. Maybe like little description, so several, was it a seminar, a lecture course, and so on. Then to ask, to kind of put forward your personal pedagogies, and sort of your personal 3 do's, like 3 things that you really think we should do, and 3 things that we really should not do in the setup of your teaching, so kind of the list of do's and don'ts. And then I asked each of them also to prepare a question, for each other, so just kind of begin the discussion. So I kind of see, the first part of this meeting, dedicated to the statements and to this discussion among the panelists, and then we definitely will open up questions, floor, to the questions and so on. So maybe it would be very good idea if people have questions, to type them to the chat, either to me or to Sylvain, because we're co-hosts, and so on. Are there things that I forgot? Does anyone want to say something? Please raise your hand, maybe. No? All right, so then, Julia, the floor is yours.
Okay, hi everyone. So nice to see you all. I'm Julia Henderson. I'm coming to you from Vancouver, on the land of the Coast Salish First Nations, specifically the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. So I'm actually a postdoc at Concordia University, like Yana said, but I located in Vancouver and have been stuck here due to the pandemic. I was traveling back and forth. I also work at UBC part-time. And I'm just going to briefly mention my background because it will make sense of my teaching experience. Otherwise, people will be thinking, how did she do this? So I first trained right out of high school as an occupational therapist and did a master's of rehabilitation. And then I went to acting school at Circle in the Square in New York and spent many years as both a professional actor and an occupational therapist. And then I kind of brought these things together doing my doctorate at UBC, where I graduated in 2008, studying representations of aging and old age in contemporary theater. So that's just some context. So Yana, thank you so much for inviting me. The first question we had was to just give, or instruction was to give a bit of information about the online course that we've taught. So my experience teaching online goes back far before COVID, pre-COVID. I have taught in the online Masters of Rehabilitation program at UBC. So I taught fully online courses in writing for professional practice, this was called. So it was master's level and actually professional students who achieved their professional designations before it became a base requirement to have a master's degree. And so they want to upgrade because all of the younger healthcare professionals have master's degrees. So they were students who were located across the world. And it was, as I said, a fully online course, and none of it was in real time. So that's one experience. I also, in the Masters of Occupational Therapy program, have taught case-based small group tutorials, and the preparation for sessions was very much done online. I've taught Intro to Theater Studies at UBC, So the first year generalist course with no prerequisite. And I used our system Canvas quite a lot during that for discussions and also assignments and sharing assignments between students so they could see each other's work. So I thought those things might be relevant. And also I think one of the other reasons that Yana asked me is I was a writer in residence for Kim Solga's The Activist Classroom Teaching Commons throughout the spring. So I was thinking and writing a lot about teaching and pedagogy in times of isolation. So while I actually wasn't teaching theater courses during the pandemic, I have been doing other teaching and lots of thinking about it. So as well, I have two children, 6 and 14, who have been involved in online learning. So I have lots of experience and thoughts about that. Sorry, my little puppy is running around here. And my husband also is an acting teacher at UBC and Vancouver Film School and has been teaching online. So I have some kind of his experience teaching acting courses. Okay, so the next thing Yana asked was to mention some of our do's and don'ts for online teaching. So I think I'll start with the don'ts and then go to the corresponding do. So my first don't is don't teach everything in real time. We really can't make assumptions about students' level of access to bandwidth in their home, to the space that they have. You know, some, as you can see, I have children and dogs coming in and out of my room at the moment. Some students are like doing their sessions in their car to have private space. Some people are sharing a computer with their whole family. So I think it's important to not have everything in real time. And the do related to that is if you have large chunks that are in real time, that are synchronous, offer alternatives. So videotape the session and post it, for example. You can use transcription and things like that, so that there's some alternative for students that can't get there in real time. And also I think it would be really useful to make sure up front that you're clear about how much sort of synchronous time is required and when it is, so that students who just can't accommodate that won't sign up for the course. The next don't is don't teach straight up lectures where you're just sitting there talking the whole time. Especially for people who have a hard time attending and sitting still. I have a son with a learning disability, and for him to sit through a long lecture is impossible, even more so online than in face-to-face situations. So I think shorten your chunks of, so the do is shorten the chunks where you're speaking and offer exercises or other breakout groups or other things to break up the talking. Let's see. Oh, okay, another don't is don't require students to use programs that either cost a lot, unless you've made that really clear in the course requirements, or require a newish computer to use. So again, in my experience, my son was required to, for one of his courses, to download a program that his computer could not run. And so I think you have to be really mindful of that and understand that some students don't have the latest and greatest technology, and yeah, and that they don't have access to go to university computer labs and things like they may have in the past. Okay, my other two do's are have a really clear email policy. So because students don't have access to get to you face-to-face, they can't come up to you after class, they often might be anxious about being able to talk to you and ask you questions or express their difficulties, especially related to access. So, you know, make it just really clear from the start. If your expectation is that you'll respond within 24 hours or 48 hours, let them know. And I personally would not have a policy where it was longer than 48 hours, but everyone's situation is different. My other do is really take some time to think about access and access needs of students and see if you can address that to the very best of your ability through your teaching. So describing video, using different programs that can subtitle your videos if you're posting videos. Think about whether your documents are readable by a screen reader for people who are visually impaired. So there's lots of great resources on online access and accommodations. And I think it's important to take some time to think through that and look at it and do your best, knowing that each time you teach, you'll get better at that. One of the resources I'll mention is great to use with Zoom. Ash McCaskill originally told me about it, and it's called Otter AI. So it's a plugin or an extension to Zoom. And so as you're recording, it actually creates a transcript in real time. So for anyone who is more a visual learner, they can flip and look at the transcript. And also you have that record afterwards. So instead of trying to go back and remember everything you did while you were talking and teaching, you can actually look through the transcript and then even just touch it up and post it online for students.
Julia, I just, stop you for a second. So I raised my hand. I don't know if anybody else raised the hand. It's just, and this is actually to everybody, to every panelist. So I would ask you after the session to send me those, like every program that you mentioned, the resources and so on. So we could simply post it on CATR website, because there is a special list of available resources and so on. And I know that people might be getting anxious, that I wouldn't miss that name, wouldn't miss the name of the program, right? So it's just for everybody, for the panelists, and thanks in advance.
Yes. And I just posted it in the chat there as well for everyone. And there is a fee for it, but it's not very great. And it was, I don't know if it still is, but there was a month free trial. And we used it for our CATR working group, and it worked great. I think the last thing, Yana, am I right, was I have one more don't. I know it's my fourth one, but I'm going to add it because it might be, I'm sure this one's a little controversial and people will have different opinions. So this is my personal opinion. I do not like the use of fake backgrounds unless you are using a really extreme fake background for the purpose of your lecture or being funny or to add humor. So I quite like the ones that are like in space, but ones where it's a fake office behind you, I actually just perceive it as fake and kind of untruthful, and it makes me kind of not trust the person as much. So I know there's lots of recommendations out there that say you should use these backgrounds to make it clean and professional. I actually really like the idea of showing my students something more personal about me. So you can see here I'm in my bedroom. I probably should have got my husband to put away his clothes on the chair, but I just turned my computer. So that's my personal opinion, but I think it actually adds to the just the relationship with students if they can see a little bit about your life. So that's all of my do's and don'ts. And my question for other panelists is, what is your most important practice of care with your students when you're teaching online? And in these exceptional times of the pandemic. So thank you. That's everything I have to say. And I'm just going to post in the chat as well one article that I have found and have thought about quite a bit in terms of teaching online and the pandemic. I thought it was really thoughtful. So I've just posted the link there for everyone. Thank you very much. And I'm here for questions later.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. And I think we already have lots and lots of things to think about. And now we will be moving to Karen, right? So with a little different experience, I think, right? So little different courses, right?
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Yana, and thank you, Julia. What a great start! Like a lot of what you said is what I would have said, so I'm kind of going to endorse and hopefully expand. I'm an associate professor at Brock University. I'm presently in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, to whom I'm very grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land. So my experience teaching online is exactly one course, which I taught this summer. It was a third-year theater criticism course at Brock that was always meant to be offered. It was going to be offered this summer for the first time during the summer, because we wanted to take advantage of the Shaw and Stratford festivals and do it as an intensive for 2 weeks, where we would go to Stratford and Shaw, and that would be the theater content. And when COVID happened, we considered canceling it, and then decided to go forward for a number of reasons. One was that there were several students that were really depending on the course to progress in their degree or to graduate. And another reason was because I realized that it would be actually a really good experience to do it in advance of the fall and to have that experience. And I'm the undergraduate program officer in my department, which means it's kind of the person in charge of teaching and learning. So I thought it would be useful for me, and also I would have the experience to offer to colleagues as well. It was, I have to say straight up, it was a fantastic experience. I'm so glad I did it. I had 14 students. They were all highly motivated, turned up, did the work, and it was a great mutual inquiry. I think all of us were very relieved to be actually doing it, as opposed to freaking out about doing it. And I felt that the students really seemed very happy to have structure and to have somewhere to turn up every day. Like I said, it wasn't intensive, so we had 4-hour blocks of time for 2 weeks. And the content, what we reviewed was digital productions of various kinds. So we looked at your kind of NT Live, multi-camera, existing production that was filmed. We looked at some shows that were made to be online, and i.e. like Zoom plays that were made to be on Zoom. And then we also looked at archival, which some companies were making available, that stuff that wasn't necessarily meant to be consumed for the public, but maybe was to promote their show for touring. So lots of different kinds of theater to engage with. So in terms of the do's and don'ts, I mostly focused on the do's. The one thing my first one is think through synchronous and asynchronous, which is very much echoing what Julia said. We all have to figure out when we're online teaching whether we're going to be doing it in real time, which is synchronous, or having them work independently, which is asynchronous. And many distance learning courses have existed for a long time asynchronously. I decided to do a combination, and I was very happy with that choice, where we met every day together first thing for a half-an-hour session, which I probably could have made 45 minutes. And the students really appreciated that because it felt like a real class, like they had to turn up. And we kind of went through what they had to do that day and fielded questions and had an ongoing conversation, which I'll get to, around teaching the problem. And then I sent them off to do things that day. And I found that the combination of presence and then independent learning worked really well for this course. And so I would agree very much with Julia. I understand it to be best practice that a full 2 or 3 hour course online nonstop is very draining. So together, send them off to do something, maybe come back together for another group discussion or smaller group discussions. I found that to be a really good format. One thing I did, because it was a intensive course, and it was timetabled for 4 hours a day. When I sent them off to do other things, I was available on our platform. I wasn't on video, we were using Microsoft Teams, but it has a chat function. And I said to the students, if something comes up, if you have a question, if you want to hop on a video call, just basically, I was saying, just text me, right? Just chat to me and I'll pop on a call with you. And that I found worked really well, and the students really appreciated that sense of presence. So even if you're not actively teaching them in real space, time and space, if it's possible for you to be present to them to ask questions, I found that was very much appreciated, and it kind of made me feel better too, because I felt like I was there for them in an intensive course. Another thing that I would say is I found very important to the students is thinking about questions around consent, around things like recording. And Yana modeled that practice when we started. She said, is everybody okay with me recording? That is very important. It's very important to our undergraduate students generation. I found that when I told them that I would be video recording the session, they almost invariably, all of them every day turned their cameras off. They did not want their image recorded. And right now I'm talking, none of you are on screen either, which is, all of you have your cameras off, which is you being polite. It's really weird though, because you can't see people. Thanks, Yana. So one thing that we're working through at Brock right now is a recording mechanism whereby only my camera would be recorded right now. We wouldn't be recording the screen, we'd be recording my camera. Therefore, we don't have to worry about the students being worried about their images being recorded. Their audio would be recorded if their voices are heard, but I have a feeling like that will be better for them than their video images being recorded. So our absolutely champion production and design team at Brock, who have been so amazing this whole summer, helping us get ready to teach online, are helping me work through that question of how to do the thing that Julia was talking about, which is making sure that you're doing everything you can to make material available to the students. What if they can't use the internet because their folks are on a Zoom call? What if they just drop off the call? That happens all the time. How can we do everything we can to make sure that the material is available to them, while also making sure that they're comfortable with how it's being recorded? Is time, I feel, well spent. The final thing I'll say in terms of a do, and this can't work for everyone, but it worked for every class, but this worked really well for me, is the whole teach the problem thing. And this is a best practice thing. I think a lot of things that we're saying are things that are best practice for teaching, full stop. So the question of our course became, what is digital theater? What are its limitations? What are its definitions? And how do you review it? Because it's not the same as reviewing live theater. And that became an ongoing conversation, and a very rich one that the students became very engaged in and very combative about, in the good way of like getting in and having a debate about it. And that was a very exciting conversation for me too, because as a working theater critic, and all of us as theater folks, this question of what is this thing that we're doing when we're watching performance online? What is it? What are its limitations? What makes it different? What makes it the same? That's exactly what we're all thinking about right now. So let's just surface that and make that something that we're talking about. In terms of don't, I only have one don't, and it's don't panic. I think that it's very, very stressful. It was very stressful for me to be thinking about teaching online because I hadn't done it before. And I was very worried that the tech wasn't going to work. I didn't understand how all the things joined up. Like, how did Teams connect to Sakai, which is our or Canvas or Blackboard, things that you're afraid of and that you don't understand and you're worried that it's all going to fall apart. Guess what? It didn't fall apart. It all worked. And students are resilient. They figured it out. They didn't get lost. They followed instructions. They were resilient. They helped me create shortcuts. And I found, and like I said, I have to say, I had a great experience on this course. My big question for the group, which is very personal that I'm facing right now, is, well, that was all great for 14 students. What if you're teaching a lecture seminar course with over 100 students in the lecture, like I am in a week? What's that going to look like? Any pointers for help with a course that big? So that's my my opening salvo anyway, and I look forward to ongoing conversation.
Well, thank you, Kathryn, so much. Well, yeah, I mean, this question about turning off camera, so is really kind of a problem, right? Because we do want to see people and we do want to see reactions. We kind of feed from the reactions, right? And a lot of us, are very gestural, right? So yeah, so I speak with the whole part of my body, like all of it, so, but the only reason, I asked maybe people to turn off the cameras is like, if there's a issue with internet, I heard it's easier, right? So when we don't have visuals, right? And the other thing is just, yeah, so if people feel not very comfortable, with their own images. But on the other hand, so if people want, to show their faces and want to be more present, so that's okay too, So as soon as the internet and the gods of technology, work with us and so on. Well, again, so thanks, Kathryn, really interesting, really important, so that I really want to know, and I'll ask it later, but it's about this whole system of recording yourself, not the students, so, and whether other institutions can actually learn from this, that would be nice, so, and whether we can borrow from your institution. So now we're going to go to Kathryn, so, hi, Kathryn, can you hear me? Yay, okay, so, ready to listen to your do's and don'ts.
All right, thank you, Yana. So I hope that Larry completely disagrees with us, because I'm really just echoing what the other two have said. I want to put my question out there right at the beginning. My question is, what are your students' learning conditions going to be? Are they going to be at home in a busy household? If it looks like Yana said it looks like I'm trying to fly a plane right now, it's because I'm in a hotel room. My son is over there in his underwear watching YouTube, and I'm keeping half an eye on him to make sure he isn't in the minibar. My husband, while Julia was talking, was completely naked, getting changed for the gym and doing a little striptease for me at the same time. So these things might be happening, hopefully not my husband giving someone a striptease, but things like that will be happening for your students probably. And just concentrating on the call is enough. It's a lot. So I'm inviting you to think about what your students will be experiencing on the margins of your course. And some of them, I know for me, some of my students will be in China or in Africa, and that's another context as well. So yeah, so I was teaching in Australia last year. I was teaching in Australia up until the end of June, actually, because of the different academic calendar. I actually only had 2 weeks of in-person teaching before the semester took that turn that all of you got just at the end of the semester, right? So I had 2 in-person weeks that were really fraught, really stressed out in-person weeks, because we all knew that the virus was coming. We all knew that we'd probably be moving to online. I had really patchy attendance. They had made attendance optional. So I had lots of students who weren't there who were really stressed. I was really stressed. Like many of you probably, I found out on a Friday that we would be moving online as of Monday. And so we cobbled everything together. So I'm not trying to say that I'm an expert in anything. I'm just saying that I have had the experience of doing it for 10 weeks as opposed to some people who might have had it for 2. And so, and because I did it in a department, so I did it with a bunch of other people at the same time, I have my experience to compare to the experience of my colleagues. And I think that's useful as well. So if you were teaching last semester when the virus hit, you probably had quite a lot of time live with your students to develop a kind of a rapport with them, right? You developed a way of working with them. You had probably develop some good habits of how to learn, and then you just switch to kind of whatever, scramble to finish it up. But we're not going to have that this semester. We're starting off online right away. And so we're online for the whole semester. The students have higher expectations, I think, of what we can provide on Zoom or whatever we're using. And that rapport that you would have had when if you were teaching live isn't going to be there. And so I think Zoom is a really, really good tool for that, for establishing rapport with your students, for developing a sense of community, connection, and like Karen was saying also, this idea that we're in a course, we're actually doing a class together. I think that's really important. It's probably, I would say, Zoom or Teams is the best tool for developing that sense of togetherness, of rapport. But kind of echoing what the other two have said, Zoom is, I think, actually quite terrible for teaching and learning. If you were planning to do your whole class on Zoom, like I've been vetting the course outlines from some of our people who are teaching for us this semester, and I've tried to suggest people who were going to do a 3-hour evening class on Zoom, that might not be the very best way to get students to learn the material. It can be really, it's really exhausting to be on Zoom for 3 hours. And so I would urge you, if you were thinking of just being on Zoom for the whole class time, and especially if it's a big chunk like that, to follow Karen's advice that she also gave, which is maybe to structure that a bit differently. If you were planning to teach on Zoom, don't tune me out for the rest of what I'm saying, because I think there actually is a way to do it well. But I want to talk about a couple of other things first. So just to say, just to use Zoom, I think, judiciously for the right purpose. I think a lot of theater professors are really keen to develop rapport, really keen to develop a sense of a shared experience. It's part of what we enjoy about theater. And so if you use it for that, it's great. But I mean, come on, you've had Zoom meetings over the summer, right? You've probably at some point questioned your life choices, wondered if you were going to have to spend the rest of your life on Zoom. Do you even remember what was said in those meetings? It's happened to me a lot that this summer, I mean, I just came back to Ottawa in July, and I took over as director of our BA and our MA, so I've been having lots of administrative type meetings, and we'll make decisions in a meeting and then no one remembers even having had, I mean, we know the meeting happened, but we can't remember what we talked about. It just kind of disappears in a way that a live experience or even a video or something doesn't. So those meetings are good. They're good. Yana had suggested one, a kind of bonus meeting on Friday. No one loves bonus meetings, but it was really good. It was a really, really good idea because we saw each other and we felt less isolated afterwards, and that was the purpose of it. It was really good for that. I think maybe not all of us have learned yet how to listen well on Zoom, and I think that's probably the case for our students who are going to be they're going to have a huge cognitive load. Especially for me, I'm teaching a first-year class, and so these are students who've never set foot on our campus, who don't know each other, who don't know me, who've never been to university before, and now they're trying to learn on Zoom. The cognitive load of that is going to be huge, and you might already be feeling that way yourself about Zoom. People talk about being all zoomed out, right, after too many meetings. And if your students are taking 5 classes, they're definitely going to be all zoomed out. I mean, unless you're teaching 5 classes this semester, you're all zoomed out is less severe than they're all zoomed out. I think the Zoom fatigue for everyone is going to be real. And that's not even thinking about the kinds of things that Julia was mentioning about accessibility issues, not only accessibility in terms of learning accommodations, but also just in terms of the availability of internet and technology. So I'll tell you what I'm doing this semester. I am using Zoom. Some of the time I'm using it for the smaller group discussions. So I really like what Karen said about teaching the problem. I have my first-year students looking at what Ottawa theater companies are doing to survive during the pandemic, and they're going to be meeting with artistic directors and giving them advice as much advice as a first-year student has to offer about how to keep your audience close during the pandemic. I think the artistic directors are really excited to hear what the students have to say, and so the artistic directors and the students are going to meet together in small groups, five people, I think, and that's going to be great because if it's 5 people on a Zoom call, no one has to wait for 15 minutes for 15 other people to ask their question. They can probably all have their cameras on. They can probably, have a more dynamic kind of exchange. And it's perfect for that. It's perfect because those groups are small. It's perfect because they have a purpose. There's a deliverable at the end. They have to write a little report about that meeting. And I think Zoom is also really great for students to have a meeting with me or with the TA. And I'm going to really encourage meetings on Zoom or on Teams instead of exchanges of emails, because I think it's a really good opportunity to create that sense of connection. I really want my students to feel that I'm available for them, that I haven't just, recorded a bunch of lectures and then disappeared somewhere exotic, as if anyone can travel these days. And so I want to have those exchanges on Zoom or on Teams, but there's other things that I'm doing that aren't Zoom, and I want to talk about that a bit. So the whole part of the course that's me presenting material to students, it's about me teaching content that they're going to have to absorb and use in their future classes, so stuff that's non-negotiable learning outcomes. That's through recorded lectures. I've done some research over the summer, helped by my 12-year-old YouTuber son. I have been watching a lot of YouTubers, to figure out who gives off the right kind of vibe. So I'm trying to convey, and I think this goes to Julia's question about what kind of practices of care we're going to be having. My goal for my videos is to give off a feeling, a vibe of calm, positive, generous expertise. So the message that I'm trying to give in all of the videos that I'm making is I know how to do something that you want to learn how to do. So I'm going to show you how I do it. You can see if that might help you to do it too. So, the YouTubers I've been watching aren't theater professors. I won't be demonstrating vegan recipes or how to bullet journal or how to do yoga, but I've tried to learn from those kinds of people in terms of the manner of presenting. So I'm performing the role of successful YouTuber this semester. And all of my videos are 20 minutes at most. So going back to Julia's idea about thinking about how you chunk information, how you present short, bite-sized information. So I think the best videos that I have seen on YouTube for teaching you how to make something with tofu or how to be really bendy, those tend to be 20 minutes or shorter, really focused on a specific skill or even maybe a specific assignment. So I'm not, in case you're wondering, I'm not using any special equipment for that. I'm using my web camera. I do have a better setup than this. I actually am moving into a house and I have like a ring light and things like that, but nothing really very special. Sam is lending me his Blue Yeti microphone because apparently that's good if you're going to be a YouTuber, and he's setting up my lighting for me. But that's it. I'm not doing anything, like I don't have a special camera or anything. I want my videos to be really low key. I'm not going to edit them a lot because I want my students to feel that I'm a human being who sometimes says and who might have to rephrase something or start a sentence again. I want it to be low key like that. It's super easy to post those on YouTube afterwards as private videos. So my students will get a link to each video, and it means that they aren't out there on YouTube for future shirk committees to look at or something. They're just there for my students. And so I can feel fairly relaxed about them. It's meant to be relaxed for me and for the students. I guess pretending to be a YouTuber is not without its risks, for one thing, and I'm conscious about this for all of us actually. I think it's very easy to give students the impression that university level knowledge could be gained for free on YouTube, just like learning to do yoga or learning to make vegan recipes or whatever. All of this online teaching that we're doing, we're knocking ourselves out to be good at it, right? It could end up ultimately pushing students away from university, or encouraging the universities to think about us as creators of online content. And there's that whole, there's lots of things to worry about there. And so that's where the other key component comes in, the other thing that I'm focusing on a lot this semester. So I've said Zoom is for building rapport, the YouTube style videos are for sharing knowledge, and the third pillar for me this semester is giving really excellent feedback on frequent assignments, so that this course isn't just a YouTube experience, that there's a value to it that comes from me engaging closely with students' work. So this doesn't help solve Karen's problem about how to teach to 100 students. I've got 40 students in my first year class. I have them submitting something every single week. It's not busy work, it's never just busy work. So they've got 2 small practice assignments leading up to their first essay, and then the same thing for the second essay, and then the last thing is this big project that they're doing, this consulting project, and they've got quite a few little components for that. And so I've committed to giving lots of really excellent feedback. I'm going to use, I don't know if some of you may have taken workshops in the critical response process. That's a way to give supportive feedback to practitioners. I can't see anybody's face, so I don't know if anyone's nodding, but I really like the critical response process. It's very useful, and you can just Google it and get the basics of it, but it's meant to be done in a live situation where you and the person creating something can have an interaction. But I'm modeling some of my response on that. I'm trying to really connect with students through their work. So I want to start by describing what it is that I think they're going for. I want to ask a couple of questions about their process, and then maybe make 1 or 2 recommendations. So I'm not providing a critique so much as a response. And I think that for me, that's going to be it's going to feel quite different. If it works the way that it does normally in person, I think the students are going to feel seen and honored and supported rather than just assessed. And I recognize that that's best practice in teaching anyway, but I'm this semester making a very conscious and deliberate effort to give that kind of feedback. And I think I might try giving that feedback as voice notes. I don't know whether your LMS allows that, but for us, it's using Brightspace at UOttawa, you can make a little voice recording instead of, or in addition to writing notes. And so I think if the students are seeing me on video, and then they're having interactions on Zoom, I think this is kind of a third component that would be quite neat if they can have almost like a little podcast, like a little voice note that walks through their paper with them and tells them what I think is interesting, what I think they could have maybe done a bit differently. I'm going to really try to have like a supportive and interested, curious tone of voice so that I can reinforce that kind of human connection. I think marking can be such an alienating experience, and sometimes I find, I don't know, I find once I've marked a few papers, I start to get maybe a bit sarcastic, and I have to stop and take a little break. But I think if I'm doing this as voice recordings, it might be a good opportunity to mark with kindness, with connection. So I'm just about done. So I've given you my 3 tips of what to do. So use Zoom to build rapport, use videos to teach, use feedback to connect as well as to correct. And maybe if I have one tip about what not to do, I think I would just say, don't mistake the tool for the purpose. So none of us should be aiming to become excellent online theater instructors unless that's the purpose that we've chosen for ourselves. I think many of us will be aiming, as we always do, to be excellent theater professors, and it happens to be online this semester. And so if you just choose to do that, to be an excellent theater professor in a way that feels comfortable to you, I think it might take down some of the panic. So that one piece of advice, don't panic, from Karen is quite useful too. So you can use 1 or 2 technologies, as well as you can. Our students are accustomed to us fumbling around with the projector or not really quite knowing how to give a good PowerPoint or whatever. They'll just roll with it. It'll be fine. If you put your effort into being an excellent professor, if you put your effort into giving maybe quite thoughtful and personal feedback, then I think that's probably more important than whether you've got a good Zoom game going. And maybe just one final remark, and this kind of ties into what Yana was saying at the beginning as she was clicking away at her keyboard and improvising how to get us all in the meeting and with the right roles. We're theater people. We are inherently equipped to do this. We improvise. We connect with an audience under adverse circumstances. We make great things under time pressure out of old clothes and some random junk that was in the back, in the storage room. We can do this. It'll be fine. I really think that. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Kathryn. That was fantastic. So I'm not sure if I can be YouTuber, for certain reasons. I speak with an accent. So, but yeah, that remark about night classes, being on Zoom, yay, guilty as charged. That's me. I'm going to be at night, so on Zoom with lots of students, so I wonder who else, in the group is going to be facing that challenge of the night class. Great, thank you. So I'm keeping the, so lots of questions and also timing kind of thing. So, and now I would like to invite Larry Lawrence, Switzky, to share his experience, which were very different, so, yay. And again, like if people feel, they would like to, show their faces, and interact, we do have chat going, lots of comments, there was one comment about participation. I think we should actually pick it up later. So here we are, so, and here is Larry. Hi, Larry. So
Hi, Yana.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for being here. Kathryn, I'm afraid I'm going to be a great disappointment to you because you wanted me to say something sort of controversial or different than what we've heard so far, and I don't have a whole lot of that to go on. You've all done too good a job, done most of my job for me, so thank you for that, and apologies for not fulfilling your mandate. But let me tell you a little bit about the course that I taught this summer. It's a lot like Karen's course. It was an intensive course, mostly an upper year course. And it was actually a course that I conduct, I co-administer along with the education department at the Shaw Festival. Now I'm going to say something that may discredit me entirely because you won't trust anything I say after this, but the course is designed to be conducted over around 2 weeks, 6 to 8 hours a day. And usually we have it at the Shaw Festival. We kind of form a little school in a way. So, I mean, there are a number of different topics, but the course is sort of not about any one thing except for really the repertory theater in general. So the students see plays, we have lectures, we have discussions about analysis and production dramaturgy, but also there are panels about being in the profession. And then they also perform scenes with the help of an acting instructor and different festival members. So there's a lot of moving parts. Anyway, the reason why I might discredit myself by saying that is because this course sort of, because we were sort of trying to keep it relatively intact, we translated it pretty literally onto the online format. So we were actually together for something like 6 to 8 hours a day for 2 weeks, which resulted in extreme Zoom fatigue. I would not repeat this experiment again, although a number of really good things did come out of it. I think probably the best way I can give you a sense of what the course is or looks like is just to sort of show you what the schedule was for it. There were 26 co-instructors, so different actors and playwrights and directors that we brought in, all of whom were, well, not all of them, most of whom were associated with the Shaw Festival, although we did have the great Matt McKenzie join us from the Ukraine at the, for a couple of workshops. I'm hoping that you can all see this when I put it on here. So sort of all of our days were kind of broken up into a series of small activities, guest speakers, different sorts of practical as well as intellectual sessions, sort of a number of small activities, almost all of which were synchronous. Again, this was probably an excessively literal translation of the course. The great challenge really in adapting this course to an online medium was sort of figuring out how to translate and transpose different assignments and activities into our current circumstances. So for instance, most nights we would have been seeing plays if we were at the Shaw Festival. Instead, I had to select a number of productions. And a lot of the productions actually were kind of along the lines of what Kathryn was selecting for her course. So kind of productions that engaged the online medium, kind of the moments, the challenges, as well as opportunities of making theater for these kind of unlikely platforms like Zoom and YouTube and what have you. But I also kind of had to kind of figure out how to translate assignments. This is about the 5th time I've been teaching this course, but I couldn't use any of my normal assignments, or I didn't want to. They sort of seemed like they somehow weren't in conversation with the moment, with the circumstances, with urgent topics and questions that the students had in their minds. So instead of the final assignment, which usually involves asking students to kind of pretend they're a consultant for the festival and redesign one of the productions, since they were making their productions for a platform called StreamYard, which is the platform the Shaw Festival uses to create and broadcast productions, I asked them to create a handbook of online theater, a kind of a sort of guide for people who would be creating this form that they were experimenting with in the future. And they took to it pretty well. But I think that this was really kind of the question for me is, this is a course I'm fairly familiar with. It's material I'm fairly familiar with. What do I do with it? How do I preserve some of it while also kind of realizing that some of it is just not going to translate well to our circumstances, to our moment. And so that's possibly kind of a question to discuss as much as for me to weigh in on. So I have a series of do's and a series of don'ts. I'm afraid that most of my don'ts are just sort of stealth do's. And many of my do's and don'ts have already been said and said, with extraordinary eloquence and great examples by my colleagues here. One of them sort of amounts to points that Kathryn and Julia and Kathryn all made. But it's do ask for help. My students like to call this acknowledging your situation. A lot of them wrote that in their handbook for how to make digital theater, but don't sort of pretend as though our circumstances are perfect and that things aren't likely to fail. I think this is a particularly difficult thing for professors, because I think we get kind of caught up in a sort of culture of teaching perfectionism. I don't know how many of you had the experience I had at my university, but the messaging from my university began as, be compassionate, exercise self-care. This was at the beginning of the pandemic. And then suddenly a kind of onslaught of suggestions, workshops, different tools and tips to be the best and most excellent teacher you can ever imagine on an online platform started bombarding us. And I do think that it's great to have access to all of these tools, but I do think that it's also a little bit counterproductive in these extraordinarily imperfect circumstances to kind of feign a certain kind of invulnerability. So students have learned tools to ask for help at these very difficult times. So I think we should kind of learn from them to a large extent. I think asking for help can sometimes mean something small, like admitting you need advice about how to use the technology in front of you. Very often I've had to kind of turn to my students and say, I'm not quite sure why my breakout rooms aren't working right now. Just give me a moment. Sometimes I think it also means exchanging guest visits with colleagues. It can be very tiring to teach over a long period of time. So I think it's great to kind of to program moments when other people will kind of come in and assist you within this burdensome and challenging time, or inviting guest artists in. I think that was the best thing that happened during the Shaw course, is just that I could kind of offload some of the anxiety of having to run the whole show in the show that I just don't know how to run, by having a whole lot of other people kind of come in and share their expertise as well as some of their doubts and anxieties and knowledge. I want to kind of reiterate something that a number of other panelists have said, which is do take breaks. Whether that means kind of programming synchronous and asynchronous activities in alternation. But sometimes it also just means reading the room to the extent that you can read a Zoom room or a BB Collaborate room. And I think sometimes you just need to kind of know that there's a moment when everyone needs to step away from the screen or do an activity on their own or listen to a podcast rather than look. There were a number of questions actually that were in the chat before about how to make sure that your students are attentive or haven't just left the room when their cameras are on, or off rather. I think it's actually okay sometimes for students to leave the room when their camera's off. I think sometimes they have to. And I'm not necessarily certain that's something that we can police or worry about during this time. Of course, we'd prefer them to be as attentive continuously as possible. But I know I have a number of students who have self-reported having ADHD, and they simply need to take care of themselves sometimes. And I think that acknowledging that and kind of allowing them to take care of themselves is quite important. I think this one's a little bit less heavy. I think it's important to kind of recognize that we're still in a creative space. I think one of the great things about teaching in a theater program in a theater department, I mean, I'm technically an English program, but I teach theater and drama, is, that we kind of get to move between analytical and creative dispositions and kind of thinking and performing quite frequently. So I would sort of say, really try to think about the medium as a space for play, as well as not sort of as a scene of abjection. I think that there are quite a lot of expressive possibilities within this kind of dull and constrained teleconference box in front of me. One of the breakthrough moments in the course, at least I think it was when I asked the students to watch a short video by the Chicago-based company Manual Cinema. And Manual Cinema sort of showed a whole number of simple optical illusions you can perform. And then I asked the students all to kind of come up with an optical illusion they could perform in Zoom. And the idea was the only instruction was that they had to be able to do it pretty simply and in a short period of time. So I don't have the right camera on my screen right now to do this, but I remember once I sort of asked, one class I asked them if they wanted to take a trip to Australia with me. And what that meant was just that, I could suddenly be upside down when everybody else was right side up. We tried to kind of have sort of a spirit of play, and it was just neat to sort of watch what everybody came up with in terms of kind of thinking about not just being sort of subject or abject within this forum, but also kind of thinking about what they could do with it, how they could kind of make it somehow anti-realistic or fun or wacky or unexpected. Let me just give a couple of short don'ts, which is, and again, these are all really stealth do's. So I would say don't overplan or underplan. And I actually don't have, I'm not a great example of this because I don't know how to do it properly, but I want to practice it more. I want to try to figure out this balance. I think, unfortunately, it's more difficult to improvise in Zoom, I find, than in a classroom. I really like kind of improvising and playing off the room. And it's just so hard to read the room in Zoom. It's so hard to kind of work with their energy. So I think you do need to have kind of a punch list of activities, which is, kind of maybe a little bit more programmatic than might feel comfortable. On the other hand, all sorts of things happen when you're teaching online, from technological failure to comments in the chat that arise that kind of very happily derail a lecture or discussion. So I think, practicing finding that balance between over-planning and under-planning in this environment, I think is very important. Just to reiterate something that our students have already, that our panelists have already said, don't underestimate your students. Many of them are lonely, many of them are desperate, unfocused, some of them are even wounded or traumatized right now. But I think Karen was talking about this. Most of them are looking for purpose and direction, engagement and challenge. Sometimes your class will actually be sort of the most meaningful thing for them in a week. Not always, but maybe quite a lot of the time. And I think, very often the way that students describe this time to me is it feels like floating. So very frequently they're looking for an anchor. I do think, we have to be kind of open to students' capabilities and availability to us. But I also think that, they really are looking for challenges. They're looking for things to focus on and think about. And I think very often we can provide that for them. My final don't, which is really a do again, is again something that's already been said, but I just want to reiterate it, which is don't forget to make time to check in. using as many venues as you feel comfortable with and as many opportunities as you feel comfortable with. I think checking in really matters right now, maybe more than ever, because very often students don't feel seen and heard. The medium unfortunately lends itself to not feeling seen and heard. We've gotten a whole lot of great examples of this from our panelists, you know, making time while they're doing activities, in office hours, in non sort of evaluative comments. Kathryn was telling us about that. I kind of find that I really want to make myself available both before and after our sessions, our synchronous sessions. One of the things that I miss most is getting to encounter people in hallways, you know, both before and after classes, or before, you know, before and after presentations. And so I feel like it's kind of important to simulate that hallway encounter, the sort of moments that aren't really official, but when kind of a lot of really important things get said, or questions get asked. I think it's important to find ways to connect briefly and personally with students, and just to check in as much as you feel comfortable with. And my questions actually, I mean, unfortunately, they've already been asked. One of them is, or fortunately, one of them is I'm interested in the problem of scaling Zoom instruction. That was Karen's question. I'm actually not certain how to do it. I have some big lecture courses, and you know, I taught a 20-person seminar. So I'm actually not entirely sure how to scale up within the online milieu. I'm kind of also interested though, and this is something that Julia gave us towards the beginning, in kind of knowing sort of more tricks, like sort of knowing more things I can do with the technology that I don't know about already. Like that AI otter, I think is a great thing, is a great supplement and implement. So I'd really like to kind of know what the coolest thing is you know how to do with Zoom or BB Collaborate or any of these synchronous instructing tools that maybe other people don't know how to do. So thank you for listening, and thank you for being here. And I'm looking forward to the questions and discussion.
Well, thank you, Lottie. It's just, again, you know, so a great kind of summation and so on. So we kind of been for an hour, you know, listening to this great presentations, you know, and I'm thinking, you know, in line of what I just learned, you know, so I'm going to check in, you know, so I'm going to ask everybody to turn on their camera so we can say hello and see each other. And before we go into the kind of, you know, participants talking to each other, I would like to actually go to chat, you know, and because there was some very interesting ideas, you know, that are shared in chat, but I don't think we had chance to actually look at them, you know, so, and I can kind of, you know, would invite, you know, people who did type things in chat, maybe to repeat them. That's fantastic. We have such a wonderful group of people here. Hello, hello. So one thing I noticed, there was a question about participation and attendance, you know, so which is a kind of a, you know, kind of a dry and boring question, you know. So does anybody want to talk a little bit about this, you know? So because I think that well, I'm not sure about UOttawa, but I think in some other institutions, you can't take attendance. It's kind of forbidden, right? You know, so yeah, so does someone want to kind of talk about that? Participation and attendance. David, is it David who's trying to, I'm not sure.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
David. Yes.
Yeah, I teach at Capilano University, and I know that some instructors say, you must have your camera on all the time so I can see you, so I can do participation and I know you're there. Personally, I'm totally against that. And there are privacy issues too about some people don't want you to know they live in a car or they're in their bedroom. But we have 10% of most courses is participation. So it is about saying, well, if you're going to turn your camera off, make sure you're participating in the chat, and we have a forum for this class, and please write in those things. And that was a case previously with students that might have anxiety about talking in front of the class anyway. So there was always that thing of, well, these are how I work out the participation marks. It's about contributing in class and answering questions and being involved in groups. So if you feel very nervous about doing that, then this is the way you can do it. So that was just what I wanted to say. That, but I also wrote the thing about radio. Like, honestly, I think we're going to wear our eyes out just trying to look at screens, and we're going to be stuck in these medium close-ups, and we actually don't need to look at each other that much. It's much better to go, hey, you can switch off and just listen to what I'm saying, but now you really have to look at the screen because I'm going to show you something that's really important. But this idea of trying to make people watch the screen the whole time, I really don't think it's useful. And it's going to create eye strain. It's like, while you were doing that, I was actually doing yoga exercises listening. But I don't want you to see me doing that, right? But it's actually part of self-care as well. Like, we are going to kill students and ourselves if we try and sit here the whole time with our cameras on.
Okay. Do you have a response? Yes, Julia, please.
I agree with you that no, having everyone just watch Zoom windows all the time is not a good idea, and that some learners learn really well auditorily, but some don't, and some people with visual impairments need to lip read or to see transcription. So as we try to change it up, it's really important to just think about different learning needs and different learning abilities, and as much as possible try to offer alternatives, so that not everything is presented in one style, and also so that if someone can't access a certain modality of delivery, that there's an option for them. So Otter AI is one that I mentioned, and then there's some if you're making videos, there's some good apps that will do transcription as well. So there's one called Clip-O-Matic that I know Ash uses a lot. I'll write it. Clip-O-Matic. And that one will actually in real time give subtitles to your video. But I think you can only make videos up to a minute or two, but they might be useful sometime. And there's another one called Mix Captions. That you record the video first, but then it adds the subtitles. And I've used that one a little bit. So some things like that might, hopefully that speaks to what Larry was saying in terms of different tools that might help us. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Karen.
Oops.
Yeah, just following up on what Julia said, and again, a lot of these things are best practices usually that are particularly highlighted now, is the notion of alternatives, that if for some reason a student just can't be at a seminar or a lecture because something comes up, is there an alternative exercise that you can put in the online learning in a forums environment so that they can do some work that can stand in for their participation mark. And I also found that some of my students became very anxious to say something in our half an hour to 45-minute long meeting. And we see this in the face-to-face context as well. This thing, I'm being marked on participation, I've got to say something. And that might cause anxiety for people who are introverted. And so what I said was, particularly in this environment, if you are not comfortable speaking, don't. But the forums are open, and could you please post a couple comments or questions that indicate that you're engaged, and then that can stand for your participation mark. And that seemed to work really well. And I would just like to acknowledge Andre's comment about that it's difficult for an acting class and I think that I'm really pleased to hear that Yana is thinking of doing a session about teaching practice. I mean, this is what we're talking about is very much in the context of theater studies. And I know that in my department, which like probably every single one of your departments has practitioners teaching practice as well as people from a theater studies background teaching the kind of stuff that we're talking about. Very, very different kinds of adaptations are needing to go on. And so I think that another CATR session about teaching practice would probably be very welcome to folks who are on that side.
Yeah.
I think just to speak to that, and my husband's been teaching practice courses online, and he very much has taken the approach that you mentioned earlier, Karen, about teach the problem. So you know, he's been teaching accents and voice acting, and also motion capture courses. And he's used it as an opportunity to teach students how to set up a home taping space or a recording booth, how to do, like, a lot of the interaction is they're doing a self-tape and then he's giving feedback on it in front of the entire class. And so I think there's lots of opportunities now, especially as the industry shifts and there's a lot more requirement for self-tapes and self-recording and that sort of thing, to incorporate those different skills into your courses.
Okay. Well, so another, practice that I'm going to practice, the advice that came from Larry is ask for help. So I'm going to ask for help right now. Sylvain asked me if we can actually record chat on Zoom. So I think we can, but how? Yeah. Does anybody know?
I tried to, but it didn't seem to work. So if anyone has a clue how to proceed, would be very helpful, because a lot of things were actually said, and a lot of actually Julia sent a lot of links, very useful, that we should keep. So a few people have an answer, it seems.
Yeah. So Kathryn, Kathryn and David. Yeah.
Yes. So at the bottom right-hand corner of the chat, there's something called File, and it makes a really terrible, not super user-friendly, but a start at a document, and you have to play with it a bit. I don't know if someone has a better solution than that.
You can actually just cut and paste it. But if you're the host of Zoom, you should actually have a save function. So in the 3 dots at the bottom. So who is the host?
We have several, including myself. So
if you go down to your 3 dots in chat, there should be a save in there. But that might be the file thing that you're talking about, Kathryn.
Yeah. Okay, let me play with that, so while people trying, to do something, ask something more intelligent than that.
I have a funny anecdote to the ask for help situation. So
okay.
Hopefully this won't happen so much in a university environment, but my high school aged son had an English teacher who decided to give a Zoom session with several classes at once and asked one of her students to help with the technology. And he ended up, I don't know, giving a few other students access and things. And it ended up with this whole takeover where they were posting like rude pictures and making comments on the board, and it was out of control. The next day we all got this email, well, I won't be trying that again. So although it's good to ask for help, also be wary that things don't get out of control, because that poor teacher just lost control of the room.
Yeah, and we have more links, here. Yeah, the GIF. Oh, okay. Cool. Okay. Are there any questions from the audience now?
If I may, Yana, someone wrote in the chat earlier, like Larry, your very last point, someone, I can't remember who said that, like asked if you could say more about your very last point of scaling up, if I'm correct.
I just had the question. I don't know how to do it.
Do you have people with some experience who ever taught like large online classes? Yes, Sean.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. I know all of your names, and I've never met you all in person. So
such an opportunity.
Yeah,
we see each other. Hey.
A quick hello. I taught a class of 112. And the only strategy I have to share is to break it down to smaller groups than 112. So the more I could get people into groups of 10 and less, the more that people were able to be quite active in terms of the conversation. I also strayed away entirely from lecturing. So provided a sort of PowerPoint document prior to the class, sort of had some voice notes over the PowerPoint, and then ended the PowerPoint with lead questions that we were going to tackle once we got into the synchronous time together. So really what the synchronous time was spent doing was trying to provoke conversation, which is what I tried to do in live lectures, regardless. So for me, it was about getting people out of 115, making sure that they're all into groups of 10 or even 5 ideally. And I should say that I'm fortunate that I have unbelievable teaching assistants who themselves are outstanding educators, and I would never be able to do this without them. But it's only to say that the more that I could sort of get people into groups and focused, and then bring them all back for sort of a large free-form conversation, it felt both social and sort of manageable in terms of the numbers.
Yes, Karen.
Could I follow up, Sean, with a couple questions? First of all, where did you teach that? I'm curious where you're based.
I'm at York University.
Okay, cool, thanks. And what platforms were you working on?
So Zoom and a platform that is, I think it's Moodle, but maybe now is eClass or something. We're in the middle of a sort of switch at York in terms of our online learning platform. But we were using Moodle and Zoom. And I should say that this was at the tail end of last year. So we're not talking, I don't have a large sample size of this being successful. I have a few classes of this working successfully, which probably was at like the beginning of people's tolerances for Zoom. So when we talk about Zoom burnout, perhaps, you know, that strategy is not so successful 6 weeks in, but for the 2 weeks that I had to do it, was quite good. But it was really contingent on Zoom, doing kind of what we're doing right now and then breaking us into smaller groups.
Right. Yes, Lottie.
Sean, can I just ask a follow-up? I'm just curious, like when you broke the large lecture into smaller groups, what was the size of the small groups? Like, you know, what kinds of groups should we be aiming for?
So it depended on the exercise that we were doing, but I tried, because it like 112, depending on how much time you have, to actually come back and unpack what's been dealt with in these breakout rooms. It's super difficult if you have like, whatever it ends up being, 11 breakout rooms, right? To try to fit that into a small amount of time is quite difficult. So I was aiming for groups of 10, if possible. And I was giving them a pretty short amount of time to discuss. It was very much a sort of like pressure cooker environment. Like, this is the question. Let's like brainstorm this as quickly as possible. Let's bring this back and let's see what we got. Another sort of tool to help organize that stuff would be that there'd be sort of someone who in that group of 10 is documenting what's happening in the group, and then another person who sort of acts as the representative of that group, as it were. The person who was documenting would have a quick one sentence that they would put into the chat, but no one would send their things until I sort of said, okay, now everybody send your chat. And everybody would sort of send something to the chat bar. We had a list of things that people had unpacked in the various breakout rooms. And then we had a representative from each group walking the rest of the class through it. So it's kind of like a flipped classroom sort of idea in that way. Trying to take like my voice out of the equation as much as possible in those moments. This is also a theater history class, I suppose I should mention, in case that's relevant.
Thank you, Sean.
Yes, Julia, we can't hear you. Oops.
There we go. Got it. I didn't want to over dominate. I've taught a course as well that was fairly large, and similar kinds of strategies in that the material was delivered in modules. So rather than it being a lecture or a session by session, it was in modules, and we divided the students into learning groups, and they were similar. I think ours were 6 to 8, but I would say up to 10 would work. And we had them stay in those learning groups for half the course, and then we switched them up for the second half of the course. And the learning groups had their own, I guess, discussion forums, we call. And so part of the modules would be for them to have particular discussions, which were guided by a question or a video or an image or something. And there would be requirements where for their participation marks, they would have to make at least a certain number of comments in the discussions. And there were also some group assignments where they had to do them together, and they could choose if they wanted to do, you know, video chats or whatever on their own. But they had to create some asynchronous like chat sort of posts within the forum. And I could go in and monitor all of the different discussions and usually make 1 or 2 comments over a period of time in them, so that it's another way of checking in with students, and you can kind of get a sense from their group chat if there's somebody who's not showing up, and then you can check in with them personally, or if there's anyone who's making comments that are either inappropriate, which didn't really happen much, but more commonly that just gave a sense that they weren't doing well. And then you could check in with them. Or, you know, if there was someone who's confrontational or something, you could help teach kind of conflict resolution skills. And then there would also be aspects of the modules where each group had to share a part of their learning and discussion with the bigger class. And so that it worked quite well. There was in that course, it was a writing course, and there wasn't, it's the one I mentioned where there wasn't any synchronous learning, but it still felt very much like I was connected with the students because I was going into their chats, because I was commenting on the bigger group things, and because they were sharing their work. So it, I think, actually worked pretty well for at least that kind of course. It wouldn't obviously work so well for like a theater practice course, but for a theater studies type course, I could see it working. And I definitely took like learning from that course and incorporated into aspects of my intro to theater course that I did, where I got students to do group work and work on assignments and have sort of forum discussions and things. Yeah.
All right, cool. So I think that we had like a number, I was recording questions, you know, on paper the old way, you know, so when people were actually saying them, and I think we kind of covered most of them. There was a question about the help with big classes. There was a question about participation. There was a kind of a, I'm not so sure, more like a question or suggestion to check with students about their conditions at home, like, you know, some verifying, you know, so if they're doing well. There was the very first question from Julia about the different practices of care, you know, so kind of connects with the same thing, you know. So do we want to pick on that one? Because I think, I'm not sure if people really said that, you know, sort of, you know, articulated the question of care, or if not, then that's okay.
I mean, I think I could say that that checking in with students is to me like the primary practice of care, is acknowledging that this is a very unusual situation, and the surveying them about what their capacities are in terms of being able to connect online, and to actively be trying to come up with solutions and alternatives. That I think is I found that was really appreciated by students, and also acknowledging that those situations are fluid, and that students, even if everything's fine in week 1, I mean, I think a lot of things are going to be different by week 3, depending on how many people are using their internet signal. I mean, a lot of our students, Brock is completely online in the fall, but we're discovering that a lot of our students have come back because they weren't let out of their leases by St. Catherine's landlords. lovely people that they are. So a lot of our students are sharing space. They're sharing student houses, and we don't know what that's going to look like if they're all in class at the same time. That might have an effect on their capacity to connect. But there's also a lot of possibilities that are potentially opened up by them being in the same physical space. And so if you check in with them and you find out that there are actually groups of students who are living together, why not embrace that rather than pretend it's not happening?
That's interesting.
So that's kind of where I'm at about the care questions.
I can just add to something you had said as well, Karen, about a practice of care that you had when you were teaching. So something I've just changed in my course, I just made a note to change this in my syllabus. There's a huge difference between I'm available to meet with you by Zoom or Skype or whatever you like, send me an email and we'll set up a time. And I am sitting here on Teams waiting for your little message. It can be informal. It can be something like a drop-in, right? I've changed that because I think that's such an important practice. It's a way of taking away a barrier and of just doing our job, actually, of making sure that we're available for students. So thank you very much for that one.
You're welcome. And for me, it's like we're sitting in our office with the door open. That's what I think of it as. It's the hallway encounter. It's a different version of the hallway encounter that Larry talks about, which are where a lot of barriers fall when they walk by your door and then they come back. They go like, I actually have a question about today's class, and they just found the courage to ask it because they happened to see you were there. So I think that this is like kind of the online equivalent.
I find self-reflections are also kind of useful, as often relating to a topic, but reflecting on their own learning and how they're processing things. And you can get lots of information about how they're doing through those reflections, I think. And you can also help shape their learning by just giving a few comments on them. So I've had those in courses, and they post them and I just comment online.
I would just say that just another checking in thing is like just saying, what is the music video that expresses how you feel now? And that will also get you into running a safe classroom in terms of the content of music videos. But often learning what music they're into is a really great way to make a connection with them. It's very easy to do.
And I think that really speaks to kind of the hall conversations that Larry was talking about. Like, what I miss most about all the online Zoom kind of meetings and things that I have is that I don't get those informal conversations that are just like fun and light and personal. And so finding little ways to bring some of that into your Zoom teaching is really lovely. Sometimes I show my pets to people just so that they know a bit more about me.
Do we have something else? I had one more last question, that Larry actually raised as well, so, and when I was thinking of my classes, so that was really one of the guiding kind of questions I had, is about what do you preserve from what you used to do, like in terms of assignments, in terms of activities, in this online format? How do you transform it into something meaningful? When I say meaningful, I probably have to kind of explain, so it means that not just meaningful in terms of interaction, in terms of emotional approach and so on, but in terms of the content, because at the end you do want people to get something out of these meetings, not just sense of collegiality, which is fantastic as well, so I find, I don't know, I'm going to practice, I have no clue, like, right, because I was exactly in that situation, like in April when we had to move and do something terribly fast, and so on. So, but I tried, to kind of figure out what, the assignments, I would like to preserve, so, and, but for example, I think that a group work that can be maybe marked, you know, so I'm keeping it, you know, so I'm keeping maybe quizzes, individual quizzes, you know, and kind of alternating them and so on. So what people's thoughts on that? Silence. Did I say something horrible?
No, a similar question came up. This is Moira. What we did, I had group assignments and they fell in that horrible 3 weeks. And so I talked to the students about what to do that, how to handle that. What they did is they got together and made a big slideshow that we could look at. And then they posted their essays based on the research online. And that's how they did the group assignment.
Okay.
So that's how we worked around the problem of doing a group seminar, major group seminar. We also simplified it. There were supposed to be 2 groups. We just moved them into 1. And that made it a bit simpler for everybody. And they said that's what they wanted to do. They said, well, how are we going to do this? We can make it work this way. And actually they were very creative about coming up with a solution. So that would be my response.
Okay. Yes, Kevin.
A couple of things that I wanted to mention, which are basically plugs. One is those of you who aren't familiar with the Canadian Theatre Educators Conference that Neil Silcox runs, I'm putting the link in the chat. It started out as a conference, but it's now a series of events that Neil, who is currently the teaching fellow at Mount Allison in theater, is running. And so it's become like a clearinghouse for us and people like us to share best practices and experiences in teaching theater online. And he has, for example, a spreadsheet that I created with the help of a research assistant at Brock of all of the online theater that's available to our students at Brock. So everything that we've got in the Brock library, plus stuff that's available on the open web, including some stuff that costs, but it might be that you would want to take a course fee in order to assign a production that has a cost to it. And so that's available on that resource. And they just started last night. I wasn't able to go, but they're having Monday night, 7 o'clock tea time, and maybe it won't just be tea, for folks just to get together for an hour and chat about how we're all doing as Canadian theater educators. So really encourage you to look at that resource. And I know that at Brock, we're having a lot of questions about like what is available in terms of shows that folks can go see online, like what can we assign our students to go see? And so Michelle MacArthur has agreed to let me call on her to tell us about a really cool project that they've got going on at Windsor this term.
Thanks, Karen, for suggesting this plug. And hi, everyone. This has been such a great session. I've learned so much, so thank you. So one thing we're doing, and I welcome you to steal this idea in your departments, is we have a BFA program in Windsor, and they do a season of 6 shows in their graduating year. So we had to cancel those shows. So for the fall, we used some of that budget to commission Canadian playwrights to write 15-minute Zoom plays for our graduating acting class. And we're partnering with Outside the March. Because it's a pandemic and playwrights are out of work, we were able to get some amazing playwrights to work with. So we have David Yee, Marcus Youssef, Karen Hines, and Elena Ellie Billier. So they've kind of tailor-made these Zoom plays that are about 15 minutes in length. They'll be running in November. I'm happy to share the information, but I'd also encourage you to steal this idea, because I think it's, I've read David Yee's play so far. The plays are just being finished right now. But it's awesome, an awesome opportunity for our students to experiment with the medium and to work with these playwrights. So yeah, I'm happy to share that information. I think it hasn't officially been announced yet, but I'll send out the information.
Karen, there's a question about the collection of online Zoom productions, so I think it's on the Canadian the link, right?
Yeah, that's right, Michael. If you go to the Canadian Theatre Educators Conference link, there's something in there that says resources, and then there's a link to that spreadsheet.
Yeah. What I will do, I will ask all the panelists, to send me like links, information, so I can collect it and ask Natalie Essling to post it, because CATR has a resource page, for teaching during the pandemic, and of course, if people have more ideas, especially like this, Michelle, like that project you mentioned, and if there is like something, to be seen online, so for sure, so we will be happy to post and share with everybody else, and so on. Okay. Well, I scheduled this meeting for 2 hours from 3 to 6. We're almost at the 6 p.m. mark. I think it's been really great, run very fast, so we have about 10 minutes for some last urgent questions, to be asked, so, and again, so I'm going to the entire population right now, entire group, and, we'll ask people to ask questions if there's something urgent, If not, then we just probably will be slowly going home and thinking about our classes. Yes, Andre.
A very, very practical question. I'm still debating with this idea of the issues of privacy and cameras off. And earlier on, it was more of a joke saying, okay, it's not very practical having cameras off for acting sessions. But I'm having a directing class online in the winter, and I thought of having them present at times. Is this, nobody talked about that. We talked about having guest speakers and all that, but does it work to have students like for a 10-minute talk about a director they've been assigned? It works well in class, and then we do kind of a work on that director. But how about online? Does that work, having them give a 10-minute talk, or is it like deadly and to avoid?
I can take this briefly. I did a directing class, or a history of directing class, at the end of winter term. So it meant I only did 3 weeks of it online. Yeah, I had a sort of similar assignment, and I kind of had to be a bit flexible in terms of form. They were willing to give presentations of one kind or another, but they sort of didn't just want to sort of talk into a recording. So they wanted to do sort of different things, or at least they proposed some different things, like, kind of a sort of lecture performance, or, kind of a suturing of different clips together by the director that they'd found. And I mean, maybe it was because it was the early pandemic and, we were letting them get away with everything then, but, my response was sort of like, great, this fulfills the assignment. This sort of shows me that you've thought about the director and you've kind of made an experience for us. That demonstrates, some kind of, intellectual engagement with their work. So I don't know, I think my sense is that kind of different students have different comfort levels with, I don't know, different forms. I think, I don't know, I kind of like to encourage that, like if they want to speak into the camera for 10 minutes, that's fine. But also, if they want to do something else, some of them are just much more energized by that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Yes, Kathryn.
I just wanted, similarly. So I had a course called Making Theater, and the students were so anxious about the pandemic, and we weren't quite sure what was going to happen. It was those early days, and I just said, you know what, fuck it. Sorry, Sam. I just do a COVID project. Do something that has some intellectual merit, but that also is creative. Whatever you want to do. Does it fulfill the requirements of this assignment? Then for sure you can do it. I had students doing like a TikTok series, or I mean, all sorts of things. Someone wrote an essay, but they made a soundtrack to go with the essay, and I had to hit play at the right time, and there was was about emotions in the theater, so there were moods, and I think the students have a lot to bring to it. So maybe if you throw the assignment over to them and say, you know, here's what I need to see intellectually or artistically, but within that space, I'd love to see your creativity. They'll bring it. They'll bring something cool for you.
Cool. Yes, Devin.
Oh, I just wrote in the chat about, we have to recognize we have jobs, we're working, but a lot of those playwrights out there, this is really tough time because plays are not going on at theaters and they're not getting those royalty checks. So putting the call out there and saying, hey, would you mind coming to my class? Like someone said they had Kim in their class. I had her live in my class. She brought a box of cam loopers. She sold them cheap to the class who wanted them. And then we read sections of the play with Kim there. And it was like way better than anything I do, right? It was the favorite class of the year. And we are also in this world of representation, right? Where is the Indigenous content, the BIPOC content, the LGBTQIA content? So I just say that we're in a position where we can put the call out and invite those people into our classrooms, and it really enriches the students and our own teaching too. So yeah, I know someone was talking about having Marcus and people like that in your classes. They're hanging out there waiting to be for the theatres to open, and it's a tough time.
If I can add to that, David's point, one thing that's one opportunity that has come through the pandemic is, I think, to collaborate on guest speakers. So Karen and I, who sometimes we collaborate on pedagogy, it's awesome. So we are both teaching Intro to Theater this year. I'm teaching at Windsor, she's at Brock, and we decided to both teach Brimful of Asha by Ravi Jain. And so we are able to kind of go in on a guest talk with him over Zoom because we don't have to worry about where we are physically located. And we have a couple other guest speakers that we're doing that with. So that's another opportunity I think all of us have, is to figure out where there's overlap in our curriculum and how we can kind of share these opportunities.
Yeah, I think the ASTR people were putting together a special list of kind of available guest speakers, guest lecturers, you know, to be invited. I can dig it out, I can see where it is, you know. So I think we at the board at some point we were also thinking of creating a database, you know, of people who are willing sort of to give their time and share lectures, you know. So didn't go much, you know, beyond that, but you know, maybe if there's a you know, like real need and enthusiasm from the community, we should do that, yeah, as well. Okay, well, again, this has been really fantastic, you know, so I personally learned a lot, so going to run and incorporate lots of things, you know, in my outlines and so on. As I said, you know, so I'm hoping to have October 1st, you know, as another kind of a get together, you know, with teaching